guys, I am so excited for this episode today. I have Dr. Kristin Baier on social media. She is known as Doctoring Keto, and her focus is weight loss with her clients. So we pretty much devoted most of the episode just to talking about weight loss stalls, the top weight loss mistakes, weight loss blocks, so much just about weight loss. And it was really, really fun chatting with her. And I think she has a really practical, balanced approach to all of this. And we also talked a lot about bioindividuality and the importance of really experimenting and trying out different things for yourself in order to really be able to find what works for you. So I hope you guys enjoy today's episode with Doctoring Keto, Dr. Kristin Baier. Well, welcome, Dr. Baier. Thank you so much for being here with us today on Fast Keto. It's such a thrill to have you on the show with us.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm always just so happy to see more physicians out there who are talking about keto, helping people understand it, demystifying it, busting myths, and just helping people. It's really great to connect with more and more MDs that are out there just basically preaching keto. So we're going to talk all about weight loss on today's episode and weight loss stalls, but I just love to know, like, how did you first sort of find keto or get into it personally?
Right. So it's kind of a long journey. So when I was in my early mid-20s, I was diagnosed with lupus. During the time I was in medical school. And I did not want to have to succumb to a life on, immune modulators and steroids. So I started researching nutrition and alternative treatments. And I actually started with a vegan diet. And I was vegan for about 5 years. And it did not serve me very well. During that time, I developed all types of problems, migraines, really bad anxiety. I was irritable all the time. I actually had a B12 deficiency as well, iron deficiency. And I realized that was not working. And I then discovered Rob Wolf and the paleo world. So I slowly transitioned into paleo, and my health definitely improved, but my lupus symptoms really still had a ways to go, and my migraines were getting pretty bad. So I then discovered a book called The Migraine Miracle by Dr. Josh Turknet, who is a neurologist, and he is an advocate for ketogenic diets in terms of providing migraine relief. And I thought, this is kind of crazy, but I'll research it a bit and I'll give it a try. And within a couple weeks, my migraines were gone almost completely.
Wow.
And yeah, I was on 4 different daily preventative medications, plus all the abortive medications, and I was able to get off of them pretty quickly. And then I noticed a few months down the road that my lupus symptoms were actually improving as well. And I hadn't been on steroids or needed steroids in a while. And I thought, this is insane. Like, how come I've never heard of this as a treatment option before? So then I really started digging deeper into the research. And of course, like everyone on keto almost, I lost weight kind of unexpectedly, but it was a welcomed side effect after so many years of being on prednisone. So that was kind of my journey into the keto world.
That's really, really neat. I love that most of the doctors that I speak to find it because of their own personal health journeys. And there's nothing better than achieving some weight loss, like as a side benefit or bonus.
Yeah, especially when pretty much all the medications I had been on for lupus, like one of the side effects is weight gain. And it was like, wait, there's an option out here that can have the opposite effect.
Oh my
You
goodness.
almost get angry that no one's told you this.
Yeah. And we get so passionate after discovering this that you just want everyone to know about it. And you sort of become evangelical about it. And yeah, I think that's awesome that you're able to find relief from your lupus symptoms while kind of doing it for something else. It's so neat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And now I really have kind of changed my focus in medicine to not just autoimmune disease, but helping people lose weight through metabolic health. And a lot of that entails a low carb or a ketogenic diet, and even carnivore now I'm using quite frequently in my practice.
It's amazing once you kind of understand the connection between optimal health and nutrition and real food and nutrient density. It just seems so obvious that looking back, you're like, how was I missing this the whole time? And then you see other people who don't get it that you're like, how do you not get it? It's so obvious, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, I have patients in our weight loss practice, and some have been doing kind of a low carb ketogenic diet for years and have hit a stall or a plateau. And then I have some that have never really even heard of a low carb diet beyond, just seeing some headlines in the media. And we're really at the very beginning explaining what a carbohydrate is, and why they're breakfast of an oatmeal and banana with honey and raisins is probably not a good option for starting the day. And yeah, there's such a wide spectrum of patients who are curious about it, but just very different in where they are in the process.
Well, let's get into our main topic of today, which is weight loss on keto. Now, I've seen you do some really great posts. You have these like post-it notes. You're literally posting post-it notes. Let's talk about some of the main sort of tips that you have for people when their goal is weight loss with keto.
Right. Well, kind of like with the post-it notes, sometimes I think like keeping it simple is best. I was spending a lot of time really trying to explain some of the physiology and stuff. I'd have a few physicians reach out and be like, "Oh, this is great. Thank you. Like, can I get, the information on your sources?" But for the most people interested in losing weight, simple is best. We try to keep it really easy for people, and a lot of it is just spending time with them to give them the education and explaining how insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance works and what happens to your glucose when you eat a high amount of processed carbs and sugar, and why we don't want to have the glycemic variability. And once we can kind of rebalance the digestive hormones, your insulin and your GLP-1 and GIP, peptide YY, all of those, your weight really does kind of settle where it's meant to be. Once we get your metabolic health in order, weight loss is much easier. It's like you're no longer fighting this uphill battle.
Yes, it's great to help people understand. And one of the things I love about keto is it almost forces you to get a bit of an education on nutrition so that you learn and understand all these concepts. Like so many people never knew what a macronutrient was before, or, the nutrient density of certain like liver versus like kale, you kind of have to learn a little bit about it. And I think most people end up learning and getting more than they bargained for when they go into keto.
Yeah, it's like it's almost turns into an addiction where you just want to keep learning more and more. You start listening to all the podcasts, reading all the books, watching the YouTube channels, and it's just like it consumes your life for the beginning stages because you just want to keep learning more and more about it.
Well, seeing as there is so much information now about keto, how do you kind of distill sort of all that information into, like you said, just simple concepts that people can grasp? Like, what are sort of your maybe top 3 tips for people who are wanting to achieve weight loss?
Right. So, it's nice keto's been getting so much attention, but I also think it has opened the door for people really trying to capitalize on it. And unfortunately, that comes with some bad information or some products that are available out there that say they're keto friendly, but are still really processed and probably not the best nutritional options. So one of my first tips is, regardless of what diet you're on, but especially with keto, focus on nutrient dense whole foods. If it came from the ground or a tree, or if it breathed, that's probably a better option than if it came from a factory. And that holds true, like I said, with keto or with really any diet. I think getting rid of the ultra processed food is really the first step, not just for weight loss, but for health. Um, and then my second tip for people is that I see there's a lot of back and forth about, should I increase fat? Should I increase protein? And I think it really depends on the goals. I am of the thought that the first couple months while you're becoming fat adapted, you probably do better with a slightly higher protein. But then people usually hit kind of a weight loss plateau in their journey. And that's the point when I really start cutting back on added fat. And I will be honest, that doesn't work well for everyone. Some people do better staying on a higher fat ketogenic diet, and some do better kind of, reducing the added fats, the cream, the butter, the oils, and focusing more on protein. But I think it really is dependent on the person, where they are at in the process, and what are their goals. Are they trying to put on muscle mass, maintain muscle mass? What works for a 25-year-old male is not going to work the same way for a 60-year-old postmenopausal female. So we really have to take into account the individual variations there. And then my third tip with keto in general is don't force fasting. And this is kind of a change in my thinking over the past few years. I used to think, intermittent fasting and keto really go very well together. And I think they do. I think once you're fat adapted, your appetite is suppressed. But I'm actually seeing people now who have really pushed the lever on fasting. They're down to like one meal a day, or they're doing frequent 36, 48-hour fast. And while they don't feel very hungry, they start, having more or more significant decreases in muscle mass. They're losing more lean body mass. Their hair starts thinning. Sometimes we're seeing hormone dysfunction, thyroid dysfunction, and you put them back on 3 meals a day. And I'm not saying like they need to eat every few hours and need to be snacking, 3 meals, maybe in a 10-hour window or so. And they do very well. And they get past that weight loss plateau, their hormones regulate, their thyroid returns to normal. They stop having all this hair shedding. And we see their fat loss increase again. So there's just so many different variations, and I hate to make like general statements because I know that's not going to be the case for everyone, right? But in general, for the most part, I think not forcing fasting, focusing on whole foods, and maybe decreasing some of the added fats once you're fat adapted would probably be my top tips.
So, with the second tip, you said that you think people should focus on higher protein at first and then reduce the fat. So, do you mean to start off with higher protein and higher fat and then like moderate both of them? Or were you just, or you start off with high protein and high fat and then you just cut down on the fat?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person. So I think older people as well, like as we're aging, we're trying to offset sarcopenia too. So I'll do kind of a higher fat, higher protein in the beginning. And by higher protein, I mean like 30% around protein. There's some in the keto world who are eating 15 to 20% protein, and I don't think that's enough for most people. What I will do once they are fat adapted, I might even take their protein up to 35 to 40%, assuming they don't have kidney disease or anything. And then we'll cut back on the added fats. And their fat intake might go down to like 50, 60%, somewhere in that vicinity. So I do think some of the talk in the keto world around protein is a little bit misleading sometimes. And people get scared that if they eat too much protein, it's going to knock them out of ketosis. And I think, if you eat a caloric surplus, you can be knocked out of ketosis too. But for most people, I don't really mind if they're going in and out of ketosis. If we're using it for medical reasons, like we're epilepsy or Parkinson's or really good migraine control, maybe we do need to stay in strict ketosis for a while. But for most people, if they're going in and out, they still have great weight loss results. And I'm completely fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely don't need to be in a state of ketogenesis to have lipolysis occurring, right? They're not necessarily there. But do you think that you need to have sort of a caloric deficit every day in order to burn fat? And so you'd want that to be coming more from the fat calories?
That's like the $1,000,000 question, right?
Right.
Like two schools of thought that people that think as long as you keep your carbs low and your insulin is low, you can eat as much as you want. And then you have the other camp that's saying, no, you still need a caloric deficit. And I will tell you, I'm definitely in the camp that thinks you still need a caloric deficit.
Right.
Um, and the beauty of keto is that most people feel their hunger and cravings are under better control when they're in a state of nutritional ketosis. It really does suppress the appetite. So reducing your calories becomes easier as well. And I do think there are a lot of anti-inflammatory benefits from being keto that you don't necessarily see in a caloric deficit with higher carbs. So inflammation, plays a huge role in the body too, and especially with weight loss. Chronic inflammation can absolutely hinder weight loss efforts. So I think there's a definite benefit to keto, but you still need that caloric deficit component as well.
I'm so glad that you think that way too, because I know that in the low carb space, there's been a lot of debunking of calories and a lot more taking into account the hormonal, the endocrine system, and the hormonal signaling and understanding the importance of insulin, as this energy regulator in the body. But that doesn't mean that that totally invalidates everything that we know about calories. So I don't understand why there's this if calories, if hormones matter, then that means that calories can't matter. Like, why can't we count both of them?
Right, they're not mutually exclusive here. The human body is so complex, and I think when people say it's all about calories in, calories out, I mean, I just said I like to keep things simple, but I think that's a little too simplified. Like, we do have to still take into account some physiology and biology and the whole endocrine system. But, just because we know when we manage insulin, weight loss is easier and more sustainable usually, that doesn't mean calories don't count. And I think kind of going into a hot topic in keto as well is this debate, but everyone tends to start getting tunnel vision. I shouldn't say everyone. A lot of people start getting tunnel vision, and once they have success on keto or low carb, they don't want to see anything else. And some people start to ignore, the other side's arguments or research that comes out that, okay, maybe there are other things we need to consider here. And I think it's really important, especially for practitioners, to stay open-minded and look at things objectively. I've had a lot of personal success with keto, and I want it to be the answer for everyone, but it's not, right? So it works well for a lot of people. But there are some people who do better with a slightly higher carbs, and maybe they do a lower carb paleo type diet. But with weight loss, what I'm finding, at least in my practice, you really do have to be in a caloric deficit. And however we can get you there, and you're happy and it's sustainable, that's probably the best option for you. That keto works well for many people in that regard, but not everyone.
So you basically recommend making sure people get off the processed foods, make sure they prioritize protein, start off with, maybe going with a higher fat ketogenic approach, and then maybe cutting some of that in order to create a deficit. Do you like try to make sure people maintain a certain level of deficit, or, to make sure their metabolic rate stays higher?
Yes, definitely. I think that's very important to consider. So I know most people well, I shouldn't say most people. People are either really like counting calories and tracking, or they hate it, you know? And most people are very upfront that they don't want to do that indefinitely, which I completely understand. But I think tracking is a helpful tool in the beginning, just to kind of gauge where we're at. I usually don't tell people like, limit yourself to this many calories. What I do first, the first couple weeks, my only goal for them is to eliminate processed food. I'm focusing on meat, seafood, non-starchy vegetables. Really, I'm allowing fruit at that point. But really, I just want to get them off of processed food. And then we can start to rebalance these hormones, and they can become more in tune with their appetite control, and getting that message to the hypothalamus that acts as like the thermostat for weight control in the body. So first, we get them off of processed food. And then once their appetite and hunger really regulate, then we can start to track down like how many calories they're getting a day, what their macro breakdown is, and we can titrate from there. I have patients that when we start to drop the carbohydrates a bit, drop their insulin levels, they can still lose weight, eating 1,800 calories a day, and that works well for them. For some people, that's a little too much. We need to go down to like 1,500. But I will find it's very rare I need to take people below 1,500 calories. There are some, um, and it's usually like postmenopausal women, to be honest, but I never drop them really below 1,300 calories. And usually at that point, I'm encouraging them to get more movement, specifically resistance training.
Yeah, that's great that you encourage that. So you mentioned that some people run into stalls and you recommend, dropping the fat a little. What other tips do you have for people for dealing with stalls? It's probably the top 3 question that I get.
Right. And it's going to happen. The body adapts, and there are going to be periods of stalls in the weight loss journey. So I like to really look at their diet. I will say dairy tends to be a bit of a problem for some people. Not everyone. Some people handle it really well. But as soon as we cut back on dairy, and usually like the added dairy, like the butters and creams, weight loss can pick back up, especially if they're drinking coffee with cream in it all day long. So kind of making sure they're not overdoing dairy would be my first step. And then I ask them about the frequency of their eating. Again, I feel like some people, like their appetite is so well controlled, they do go to one meal a day, or maybe two meals. And I really kind of change up their fasting routine. I might tell them to go back to 3 meals a day, not necessarily increasing their calories, but just breaking up that amount of food into 3 meals.
Okay.
Other people, I might tell them they need to eat a little bit more again. Sometimes, again, their appetite's well controlled. They're naturally just not eating enough calories by choice. So then we change it up. But I do find even with weight loss stalls, when people are continuing this lifestyle, sometimes they're losing inches as well. So I always try to encourage them to look for the non-scale victories too. Are you taking your waist circumference? Are you feeling yourself getting stronger in the gym? And then like one of my other tips too is, let's look at your movement. Are you getting, it doesn't even have to be formal exercise. Are you just getting movement throughout your day? Are you taking walking breaks, if you're sitting on Zoom or working from home all day? And then resistance training twice a week, I think is very helpful as well, especially when we're trying to improve overall body composition. But I think the key is just acknowledging we have to change what we're doing. And there are different variables. Maybe it is the frequency of eating, maybe it is our workout routine, and then maybe we need to change the macros. Maybe we'll increase protein, decrease fat. And, for some people, it might be the opposite. Maybe we increase the fat a little bit and decrease the protein, making sure processed foods haven't snuck back into the diet, and checking their sleep. Are you getting quality sleep? When we're not getting into those deep stages of sleep, our cortisol is going to go up, which is going to be problematic for our glucose and insulin functioning. And then how's your stress? I would say stress is probably one of the biggest causes of weight regain or weight loss stalls in my practice. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with that cortisol effect. So, maybe we need to start like a meditation on a daily basis if they're not already doing it, or carving out 20 minutes a day for them to do something for themselves. And there are a lot of components to look at. I think weight loss has to be so comprehensive, and it really works best when we're addressing all these pillars of health, not just one component.
Yeah, those are really great tips. Now, you must see a lot of people in the low carb community posting different things and sharing. Are there some like sort of mistakes that you see a lot of people making that you kind of want to love to put on a billboard to just tell people like stop making these mistakes? I know you've done some like posts on that.
Yeah, and I am trying to be a little more open-minded. At first, it used to drive me crazy when I would see all this, like what I consider dirty keto out there, people eating all these keto processed foods and packaged foods still, which I'm not arguing that, some people can lose weight doing that, but I don't think that's optimal for health. But now I'm a little more understanding and seeing that maybe a dirty version of keto serves as a good bridge if you're coming off the standard American diet. Sometimes drastically changing and getting rid of all processed food and going keto, it's a miserable few weeks for them, right? They're like, they don't want to do it, they give up. And maybe for some people, a dirty keto version is a good bridge to getting to a healthier keto.
Right.
So, I don't get quite as upset anymore when I see people posting about dirty keto. I do think people, I've really, like I mentioned, changed my thoughts on fasting a lot lately, just from clinical experience. And I think people pushing fasting all the time, like, let's do a 3-day fast, let's do a 7-day fast. And I think they can be absolutely great when done appropriately. Um, too, but for someone who is already dealing with some other source of stress in their life, or some other disease process, like maybe fasting is not appropriate for them at that time. But maybe someone who's trying to heal from Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or an autoimmune flare, like they might do very well with an extended fast at that point in time. So I think trying to generalize keto and fasting um, is a little problematic, and I think that leads to a lot of confusion as people don't know what to do. I mean, even in the nutritional world in general, you hear so many different ideas and perspectives, and some people think they should be plant-based, some people think carnivore, some people are high carb, some are low carb. There's so much conflicting information, and then just having even more conflicting information within the low carb keto community can really leave people feeling discouraged. So it's great there's these outlets for general information and things, but I like to encourage people to take it with a grain of salt, and remember, what works for one person might not be the best option for you at this point in your journey.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think has been one of the biggest takeaways for me in all these years is that wildly different approaches seem to work for different people. And then it does create a lot of confusion because you have like these Facebook groups where people are in there and they're asking for advice in like keto or carnivore groups. And some people are saying like, I didn't lose weight until I went to 3,000 calories of pure fat. And then other people are saying, I didn't lose weight until I cut my fat to nothing. And, or, the only way I lose weight is with extended fasting and all these different things. And I just try to keep encouraging people, like, if you're stuck on the protein versus fat debate or one of these things, you have to just try out like maybe both approaches. And that's the only way you'll know for you, because even though we have really similar physiology and biochemistry, you're not going to know unless you try. And there's all these different factors, right, with the gut and just like past health that are going to, influence which works best for you and which is most sustainable as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said it best. People need to experiment and figure out what works best for them, be their own N=1 study. And I think it'll be surprising for people. I have a friend who is a retired Navy SEAL who was paleo and then keto and then has been carnivore mostly like the past, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 months or so. And then, it's not really working. I don't want to say it's not working well for him, but he started putting on a little bit of weight and fat, not muscle. And we realized he was just in a huge caloric surplus every day, like eating, well over 3,000 calories. And it wasn't necessarily a macro thing. We just needed to cut back across the board on, on the caloric intake. So there's just a lot to consider too. It could be macros, it could be caloric intake. There's so many variables.
Yes, and it can even come down to, just really subtle differences in your gut bacteria, or, there's still so much that we don't know, but I know there are certain principles that, seem to work for stalls. For me, things like cutting out nuts and dairy. You mentioned dairy, like for lots of different reasons, but just maybe the simple fact that they're really calorie dense and it's hard to just eat a small amount. Like those are kind of like a couple of obvious foods. Are there any others that come to mind? I know we kind of touched on the processed foods, but are there any others that you see can be like maybe more problematic or blocking weight loss?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned nuts as well. I do think those can be problematic. And I go back and forth on the mechanism of that. They are, very caloric dense and honestly easy to overeat, right? Especially if they're roasted and salted. A couple handfuls of macadamia nuts is quite a bit of calories. They're also higher in linoleic acid too, which, there's a lot of talk now, especially in the keto world, about the type of fat that you're eating. For so long, we heard saturated fat was bad. And now it's looking more like these polyunsaturated fatty acids like linoleic acid are very inflammatory, especially at the level of the mitochondria, and can play a role in insulin resistance or sensitivity as well. And maybe that is a contributing factor because a lot of nuts are higher in linoleic acid. And then with dairy too, it's easy to overeat cheese and things for some people. But there is the component that dairy is meant to make a mammal infant grow. And it can be insulinogenic, causing this insulin secretion even without having carbs. So, is it calories? Is there a bigger role playing it in the endocrine system there with these foods? I don't know, but I do know from experience, cutting back on dairy and nuts really does accelerate weight loss. And then processed foods as well. And I think just a lot of the added oils in general. And again, it might be calories. And I'm very untrusting of the food industry. And I think there was a study out of UC Davis that showed a lot of these avocado oils and even olive oils, they're really blends of maybe a little avocado oil and then canola oil, which again is this industrialized processed oil that's higher in linoleic acid. And maybe it isn't just the calories, maybe it's the inflammation and damage to the mitochondria that these added oils are creating a problem for us. So yeah, I think really sticking to the whole foods as much as possible, and then kind of cutting back on dairy and nuts. Those are really the big ones for me. I can't think of anything else that I find to be very problematic for most people.
I'm so glad you brought up the vegetable and seed oils. It's definitely been getting more attention, and the more that I've looked into it personally, I almost now think that people should focus on eliminating that, even before like sugar, some of the processed, carbs, just because, I've been really influenced by the work of Dr. Kate Shanahan, and she really breaks down, the it's kind of mitochondrial failure, short circuiting that happens in our cells, and then the half-life and how long it takes to actually get these oils out, whereas like sugar doesn't exactly like stay in your cells in the same way that, you know, these oils do. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because, you know, it seems like it should be getting a lot more attention, and, you know, hopefully it does. And like you said, those oils, they'll say like healthy, you know, avocado mayo, and then, you know, you look at the ingredients and you're like, oh, they added a little in there at the end, and it's just like, just everybody should be required to read the ingredients.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's so misleading. You know, I see it all the time. I have patients that are like, oh, no, I use this avocado mayo. And it's like, the only brand I know that does not add the other oils is Primal Kitchen. And maybe there's more. I don't know of them. But so often, or even like the olive oil mayo and things, like they're still loaded with soybean oil and things like that. And I agree with you. And you know, that was a bit of a change in my thinking too over the past couple of years. And don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone's benefiting from eating, you know, high amounts of sugar or added sugar. But in terms of which is the greater evil, you know, I'm starting to think it could be these industrialized processed seed oils. And Kate Shanahan's wonderful. I read both of her books. I love listening to her interviews. And this is not a new concept. She's been saying this for years. And I feel like it's only recently started gaining more traction.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that it has. It just seems, you know, really, really important. And it's just, it's in everything. I mean, you just find these oils in almost every food product. And, you know, that to me seems to be a huge reason why people get such incredible, remarkable results on elimination protocols like carnivore. I'd love to know your opinion on the carnivore diet. It's really, you know, grown in the past couple of years, especially in our space.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the carnivore diet. I used it myself and I still do. Well, go it, you know, I'll have carnivore days completely. Sometimes maybe like an entire week now, but I've done a couple bouts of carnivore for an extended period of time. And my first attempt, so I should clarify, my goals for it were always to reduce inflammation and really to see if I can control my lupus symptoms, which with keto are pretty well controlled. But there are some things, and you know, like this could be tightened up a little bit. Let's see if carnivore takes care of it. So the first time I tried carnivore, I did it for maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and I gained 5 pounds. And that that was because I was probably eating ribeye and extra fat like 3 times a day, and it was good. I loved it, but it was not doing it how I would now recommend. So I don't think it's, again, permission to eat unlimited quantities of food. Calories still do matter, even though it was zero carbohydrates. And then the second time I tried carnivore, I definitely reined in the portion control a bit. And I was doing more 2 meals a day. And at that time, it did work really well for me. I felt fantastic in terms of joint pain. And with lupus, people get this malar rash. So they get very red across their cheeks and their nose. And I know, and that's always been like one of my, just the lingering symptoms that I cannot fully control. And I noticed with carnivore that improved significantly. So I was really happy with it. And I didn't lose much weight doing it, but I didn't gain weight that second time around. So that was a win for me. Um, and when I have patients who have autoimmune disease, or they have digestive issues, or maybe eczema, or you know, something is not quite right, a chronic condition, I am very quick to recommend a carnivore diet. It's like the ultimate elimination diet. And for most of them, I tell them it's not, you know, we don't have to do this permanently. Let's give it a try for 3 months or so, maybe 6 months, see what happens. And then we can try a slow reintroduction. But I think carnivore is a fantastic tool for helping people get to the root cause of food sensitivities and what could be triggering some of their chronic symptoms that they haven't been able to identify otherwise.
I'm glad you tried it yourself. I just think like every doctor out there should try these different protocols, especially like low carb, like especially the ones who are so dead set against it. I'm like, well, have you even ever tried it? I think one of the big problems that carnivore especially gets, and keto too, is like the branding is terrible. It makes it sound like all we're doing is eating like a whole cow a day and we're in like ketoacidosis, so it's like if it was called the nutrient dense, like the proper human diet, like Dr. Ken Baier or Dr. Kate Shanahan says, the human diet, if it was just the nutrient dense whole foods, no processed refined sugars or carbs or oils diet, that would be, people would, I think, be more open to understanding it, or they would understand it more quickly. But sometimes I think the names kind of give it a bad impression.
I completely agree. Yeah, if you just say I'm carnivore, 90% of society is going to look at you like you're crazy, right? And, if you say, oh, I'm doing the proper human diet, or I've no grains, no sugar, no oils, like it sounds a little bit more appealing and not quite as extreme as the argument goes.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions from people asking if I was still doing keto while pregnant. And I was like, well, keto to me is the healthiest diet in the world. So it's like you're saying, are you still doing the healthiest diet in the world while you're pregnant? Like, yeah, definitely.
Time to be like on the healthiest diet it's while you're pregnant, right?
Yeah, it's just, there's just so much bad facts out there, bad information. And it's so helpful to have doctors like you who are, really like allies of the average person to be able to help them understand how they can gain so much health, reverse so many conditions, get off medications just from healing their body with real food. And I just love seeing it out there. So where can people find you if they want to follow your work and connect with you?
Thanks for asking. Usually, I'd say I spend the most time on Instagram these days. Right now, I'm at Doctoring Keto, but I'm actually considering rebranding and just being Dr. Kristin Baier on Instagram. So I'll be one of those, either my name or Doctoring Keto. But that's a good way to connect with me, and I try to respond to all the messages I get. So yeah.
That's wonderful. My last question for you is just, how have you personally evolved your approach to keto in all these years? Does it look exactly the same as when you started, or is it different now?
Right, that's a great question. I would say, uh, no, it is pretty different. So when I first started, I was eating a very high amount of like macadamia nuts, and I was eating a very high amount of dairy. And for autoimmune patients, that's not recommended either. I usually eliminate those things completely and make it more of a hybrid keto paleo autoimmune protocol. So I would say I really kind of cleaned up and really focused on nutrient dense, non-inflammatory foods, specifically for autoimmune disease and weight loss. And then I joked that keto was kind of the gateway to carnivore and really focused on animal foods then there on out. And I mean, that is still the majority of my diet. I've added a few vegetables back in, but I'd say I'm still like 95% of my diet is animal based. And with maybe a few non-starchy vegetables, maybe berries on rare occasion too. And that's really what my keto diet looks like these days.
Just as a really quick follow-up on that, we talk a lot about anti-nutrients that are found, in legumes and plant foods, things like oxalates, phytates. Do you have sort of a hierarchy, or are there any in particular, any sort of groups that you prioritize or recommend that people try to eliminate just for optimal health?
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm still playing around with it. I find most people do okay with foods that could be higher in oxalates. They feel great. They're having energetic workouts, no chronic health issues. And those people, I don't really restrict anything. Now, if someone still has some lingering symptoms, then I might go to more low oxalate or even low histamine foods. And it really is dependent on the symptoms. If they don't have histamine issues, I'll start with avocados, usually some olives, and then maybe like arugula going on there. And if they have digestive issues, I stay away from like cruciferous vegetables and things. If they have autoimmune issues, I stay away from nightshades. If they have histamine intolerance, I do stay away from avocados. And so it really, I try to take a bit more of a individual approach, and not make just general statements, because most of my patients are pretty sick. They want weight loss, but they also want to heal some kind of chronic condition. So it's really, I think there's so much bio individuality. Like I hesitate to say like, this is good or this is bad, because it can be very different person to person.
No, you really gave the perfect answer. It was just what I wanted to hear, because I worry sometimes that people can get a little bit, you know, too hyper focused on some of those things, and then they start developing like food phobias, and they're like, well, I heard that oxalates are in these foods, so I have to stay away from them. And it's more like, well, maybe just don't drink like juice, liters of green juice full of like spinach and chard, and don't like just overdo all, because there's like about 10 or 12 of these plant foods that are super like, not just have a little oxalate, but they have like really high dense amounts of oxalates. It's like, maybe just be mindful of those, but it doesn't mean that you have to start fearing all these plant foods, or fearing that they might have all these anti-nutrients that inhibit your absorption, all that. So I'm glad that you brought, you said that, because it doesn't have to be a concern, especially if you don't have any health issues and you feel great, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're on the same page with a lot of this here, so which is great. And I think it's so important to look at things objectively and really take into account individual needs. And yeah, I think you're doing such a great job with your social media post and the podcast and everything too, really helping people navigate the differences.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just really appreciate that you're open-minded, and you've had a personal experience with all of this stuff. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all of this. And I'm looking forward to keep seeing what you're posting online with your post-its.
My post-its, those are my most popular posts, like, which
Yeah.
cracks me up, because they take 2 seconds versus these longer posts that can take an hour to compose. But yeah, I will keep the post-its coming. Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning into the episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time chatting with Dr. Baier, and I would love to have her on again in the future. I love that she really focuses on weight loss, and that's, something that she has a lot of experience with her patients, working with and dealing with them, and, really seeing what works and what doesn't. And you can only really gain that from, one-on-one experience of working with hundreds, maybe thousands of patients. So I really enjoyed the episode. I hope that you guys did too. I'm wishing you guys a wonderful start to your week. I love you guys. As always, if you want to try out keto with me being your coach and guide, I would love to help and answer any questions that you have as you go along trying out keto and help you get the results that you'd love to see. You can join by purchasing any of the meal plan programs that I have available at ketogenicgirl.com. That's www.ketogenicgirl.com. And I would love, love, love to have you join. So I'm wishing you a wonderful weekend. Please tag me in your stories if you feel like it. Let me know where you're listening from, what you're up to, what insights or takeaways you had. It just means so much to me whenever you guys share and let me know where you are, what you're up to, and all of that. So sending you lots of love, big hugs, and wishing you a fat-filled rest of your week. Bye for now.